This is Olivia Green interviewing Charles Fox for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is currently 9:46 a.m. on August 13th, 2025, and this interview is being recorded at WCSU in Wilberforce, Ohio. Mr. Fox, thank you so much for sitting down and giving us some time today.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for considering me.
And before I get into the questions, can you please state your full name for the record and tell us what your relationship is to WCSU?
My full name is Charles Washington Fox III. I am General Manager at WCSU Radio, Central State University.
And can you tell me when and where you were born?
I was born June 13th, 1945 in Clarksburg, West Virginia.
Tell me a little bit about the people that raised you. Like, if we were in the movie of your life, it's the opening scene for a young Charles Fox, what would it look like?
When you say a very young Charles Fox, that's funny. My mother was a English and French teacher. My father was an Episcopal missionary, and we moved quite a bit because he took assignments establishing missions in black communities in Clarksburg, where I was born, Kansas City, Baltimore, Maryland, Charlottesville, Virginia, and then back to Baltimore.
Do you have any siblings?
A sister and a brother. It's called a sister sandwich. She's in the middle. I'm the oldest. My sister is Wendella. She just retired as the director of the Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Education out of the Philadelphia office. My brother just retired. He's 8 years younger. His name is Maurice, and his skill is corporate management, especially in the industrial and medical profession, medical world, medical supplies.
Mm-hmm. And so I hear you talk about movement within a particular region, West Virginia, the Maryland area, as a young child. How do you feel like that affected you? When you think about home, what does that look like, or where is that?
Home is Johnsontown, West Virginia. That's where our grandparents were. And Johnsontown is the first free black township established by my great-great-grandfather with the assistance of a Quaker family, the Heights, that helped him to get 16 acres and establish this town. So it's the first town for free blacks. That was in Virginia. But after the Civil War, it's when that part of Virginia seceded, it became West Virginia. Mm-hmm. So it's in Johnsontown, West Virginia.
And did you have a sense of this history, your family history, and how it was rooted in that place while you were growing up there?
I did not have a sense of the gravity of the history at all. I had a sense that this was a special place. I remember as a child, it made me feel special when I was there. I felt free, but I felt free pretty much everywhere, but especially here, I felt connected to a lot of things. I was connected to nature because of the farm, working with the farm, helping out. I was expected to help out, but lots of playtime, especially with my invisible friend, Jason. He was Native American. No one knew about him. I never shared him until later. I was 40 years old when Jason popped up in my head because I was trying to find a code for a password for my new laptop, right? And I said, what could I use? And the name Jason popped. I said, oh my God, I forgot about Jason. And when I shared that with a researcher that did work on genealogy and things like that, she discovered a pioneer's diary that had a recording that during the Indian Wars, there was a boy that seemed to have no family, and who was a Native American boy, and his name was Jason.
Wow. Yeah, I just wondering if you can say a little bit more about, like, yeah, discovering that. How did that make you contextualize your childhood, or how did that make you feel about yourself and your connection to that history?
Two things. There was always storytelling going on in the family, and all the men especially were storytellers. My grandfather and my father and uncle. And when we gathered around the dinner table or in the parlor, it's where the kids were not supposed to be seen in the parlor. But you could sit outside the door and listen to all the stories. There's lots of stories about family. And for example, my name, Charles Washington Fox, came from, and it's the third, came from the fact that when my great-grandfather, John Fox, pictured behind me on the wall, after he was freed during the Emancipation, it was actually after the Civil War, and he married a woman named Lucinda Washington. He learned that there had been arguments between George Washington and his younger brother Charles over the morality of owning slaves, that the younger brother Charles always challenged his older brother. Nearby the farm in Johnsontown is Charlestown, West Virginia, named after Charles Washington, who surveyed and developed the town, founded the town. George, insulted that his younger brother was challenging his authority and his opinions, said, "I will make sure that your name is never remembered in history." And so my great-grandfather said, "I'll make sure his name is remembered in history." And he named his first son Charles Washington Fox. So he's the senior and my father's junior. I'm the third. So I'm the third child, third generation, born free. Mm. I think you were asking, what did the realization of Jason and a later discovery, how did it impact me? It occurred to me that maybe I wasn't imagining things, that maybe there was something in another dimension that was actually real that I was aware of on the soul plane, that I was actually experiencing a life force of someone that had been there. And when I was studying the Baha'i faith, there was a book I was introduced to called The Seven Valleys and the Four Valleys, written by a spiritual teacher named Baha'u'llah. And students were asking him questions about spiritual evolve. How do you evolve spiritually? How do you grow? And his book was the answer. And in one of the pieces in that book was, consider the dream. Your eyes are sealed, yet you have vision. Your lips are sealed, yet you have conversation. Your body is at rest, yet you travel far and distant places. These are signs that the universe is within you. So with that articulation of how to see a dream in that way, and then thinking about Jason, it made me realize that there's a lot more dimension to life than just what I see with my eyes every day and what I feel through my senses, that there's a lot more to me, a lot more to all of us than what we acknowledge.
Yeah, and I think there's something too about looking back, understanding that, and then using that to interpret the now or the future, or to understand oneself. And I know that you've done a lot of genealogy work and research into your own family history, and I want to spend some more time talking about that. But I want to get a sense first of the kinds of issues that mattered to you in your community as a young person. You mentioned your family's involvement in the Episcopal Church. What were people talking about when you were young?
First, let me explain that I lived in segregated communities, and that wasn't a bad thing.
Yeah, say more about that.
It wasn't I don't know. There's this kind of perspective that, oh, it was a segregated community. They must have been really poor. Not the case at all. In fact, I wanted to tell you, Olivia, that my closest friend when I was a child was Olivia, and her father owned the funeral home. And the people that attended my father's church were all leaders in the community, public school administrators, all my teachers, so I had to really behave when I was in school, and really committed teachers. And of course, segregation and integration of schools was coming up as I was approaching the 6th grade. And the Episcopal Church was at a point of deciding, of the Diocese of Virginia was at the point of making a decision if they were going to support integration or not. And so my father was a very strong advocate for integration and helped them to come to the realization that it would be a good thing to support it. The thing about it is, with the talk about integration was supposed to be better, provide better resources for black children, we moved shortly after that, and we moved north to Baltimore, Maryland, and that was my first time in an integrated school. When they tested my academic readiness, I was 2 years ahead of their curriculum. So it wasn't as bad as everyone was saying. And I had to really go out of my to not be bored. I had to choose hard classes. I'm going to take Miss Benji's because she's going to teach Greek mythology, and she's teaching Latin. I think I'll take that, just to challenge myself and to keep my mind active, because I knew I was at an age where I could get in trouble if I was idle.
Yeah.
So I ended up actually choosing to go to an engineering school, which at the time was an all-boys school in Baltimore called Polytechnic. It's co-ed now. Mm-hmm. A lot of the students out of there were recruited either to MIT or to the Naval Academy. I went to that school because I was the first class of blacks to go to that school, and I chose to go there because I wanted to take on that challenge of that mathematical rigor, science curriculum, so that's why I actually chose to go there, to keep myself alive, keep my mind alive.
Yeah. And what did that transition feel like to you, coming from academic excellence that you were talking about, having all these really dedicated teachers, you're doing well in school, now moving to Baltimore, which is a very different kind of city, and you're in an integrated school, the first class? How are you thinking about that as a teenager?
It was the first time I experienced anger, just on the streets. I just felt anger on the streets in the community. People wanting to pick fights over what? They didn't even know you. You know? It was also my first introduction to jazz through a gang. They saw me coming up the street, and being from the country, I got on blue jeans with flannel lining, cuffs turned out. You're not looking very cool there, brother. Where are you from? Charlottesville, Virginia. Where you live? I live just a block down the street. You gonna come with us? And so I remember their names, Ronald and Leroy. They took me to their older brother's house and said, can you straighten him out? He's living in our neighborhood. So the first thing they did was they gave me a leather jacket. They said, this is not yours. We're loaning this to you. You wear this, that you're a part of our community. Okay, nice leather too. And then they said, make sure you got your buttons lined up with your zipper and that things are not like haphazard like that, and straighten that up and tuck your shirt in and pull it in tight around to the back. What kind of music you listen to? I I didn't listen to music much. I was in the country all the time, you know. So they introduced me to Nina Simone and the album song "Surrey with the Fringe on Top" by Ahmad Jamal. And that was my first introduction to jazz, and loved it. It led to a lot of other experiences because of it.
Yeah. So what was your relationship to radio and media at that point?
The adults listened to radio. I didn't. I was busy, my own imagination and things like that, visiting with my friends, doing homework. I wasn't much of a media person. We didn't have a TV until I was 12, so it was about a year later after we moved to Baltimore that we got a TV. And that was a very strange thing I noticed. It was the first time I had a disagreement with my mother, ever, about what we were going to watch on the television. And I thought it was strange that this object from outside our home would create a difference in opinion between my mother and I. And because we're family. I mean, what's this? Why are we arguing about this thing that has nothing to do with our life or our family? It's just something to be entertained by. It was odd, I thought. And later, as I was getting towards graduating from high school, I'm starting to figure out what I want to do. And I was starting to feel the stress of that pressure. What was I going to do? What was I going to go to college? I had a lot of skills and interests, and I couldn't figure out what focus. Didn't see an example of what I was feeling inside. So I'm sitting at watching TV. My father would catch me quite a bit, just staring at the TV, sitting on the couch. He'd stop in front between me and the TV set and say, that TV is not going to give you the answer you're looking for, son. So I didn't want him to ever catch me sitting in front of the TV, so I tried to be away from it if he came in the house. But he caught me this one time. I was glued to the TV. National Guard had just arrived in Birmingham, Alabama, ordered by President Kennedy. My father happened to be a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he came in, he stood between me and the TV, and he says, if it wasn't for communism, the civil rights movement wouldn't be where it is. Then he walked up, Daddy, communism? What's that got to do with the civil rights? Son, we're in the middle of the Cold War. The president's trying to prove that democracy's better than communism. Martin Luther King now has been begging him to send the National Guard down to stop the Southerners from oppressing black voters. But he would do nothing about it because he's afraid of losing that Southern Democratic vote. But when it went on television now and the world could see it, Martin Luther King called Robert Kennedy and he said, you want the world to see this on TV? That's when he sent down the National Guard.
How are you thinking about, how old are you at this point, first of all?
At that time?
At that time.
17.
17. So you're about to go out into the world on your own. How are you thinking about that when it comes to what you do next?
I didn't have a clue what I was supposed to do next. I applied to Trinity College in Connecticut. The goal was, my father found my letter of acceptance, and he says, you're going to a school of theology? I said, yeah. He says, why are you making this decision? I said, well, I look around and all the examples, the only person I see that I would want to emulate is you. Well, I'm grateful that you feel that, and I appreciate you feeling that, but I don't think you should make that decision. I think you need to go find yourself. And if you come back in a year and you still have that same feeling that you want to go in this direction, I'll back you all the way. But right now, I think you should take some time and go find yourself.
And did you?
I went in the Air Force. The next thing I saw on the TV was a commercial for joining the Air Force. 4 years I went.
Okay. What does that teach you about yourself, those 4 years?
It taught me that I can handle a lot, that I have a lot of self-discipline. I have a great focus. I was a marksman. That was the only time. My grandfather had a shotgun that sat in the hallway at the farmhouse. And when I was a little kid, I used to sit and stare at it, and he would say, "Don't you touch that, boy." And in fact, years after he died, and my uncle had that shotgun, my uncle called me. He said, my nickname was Bud. He said, "Bud, you want your grandfather's shotgun?" "No, sir." He told me never to touch it. I'm not. But I handled a gun in the military, and after the military,
That was it.
done. But I was, and still am. I mean, some friends have challenged me, not knowing my military background or anything like that, and they want to take me we're going to take you to the range. And then when the target comes back to say, "Damn, where'd you learn to shoot like that?" I said, "It's just a matter of breathing."
So, do you feel like you found yourself in the Air Force, or was there more to look for when you came out?
I found that I had purpose.
Okay.
I knew that I didn't need to be guided and told what to do for the rest of my life. I learned that I was an independent thinker, and it was time for me to make a move, not knowing what move I was going to make yet. But my mother convinced me. She says, "You always loved the arts."
Mm-hmm.
So she encouraged me to go to the Maryland Institute College of Art.
And what did you do there? What did you study?
I majored in photography, but an odd thing happened. In my junior year, trying to figure out what my thesis would be for my senior year, I started writing down a list of images I wanted to capture. And it evolved into a poem. I said, "Something's happening here." I took it to the head of the English department. I said, "I don't know what this is, but something's happening. Do you have an idea?" He says, "I think you should keep working on those images. Keep working on those images." So later there was a literary festival, and you could bring anything that had to do with anything that applied to words, lyrics, poetry, essays, anything you wanted to bring to this festival. And I walked up to audition, and he says, "And what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to read a poem." He says, "That's debatable." And after I finished and came off the stage, he came up to me and he says, would you mind doing a presentation for my class about how the stages that you went through to come to that point?" He says, "It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful." It was my first published poem called Stepmother Country Blues.
And that came from those list of images that you were...
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever take the images? Or did it...
Did I ever photograph?
Yeah.
No,
it
I
ended
just
there.
lived on paper.
Wow. And I know you went on to get a graduate degree in creative writing, right? How did that happen? Was that born out of poetry? Was that something that you specialized in going forward? Okay.
Actually, it was a collection of in between that and graduate school, I wrote for a while for an advertising agency. I was a copywriter. I went to New York for a while, did some freelance writing, and then when I came back, the opportunity to apply to Johns Hopkins University came up. I took my portfolio of everything I had been writing and presented it. Guess who was in my class?
Who?
Gil Scott Heron.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So, in the interest of time, I kind of want to skip to your introduction into broadcasting and this kind of thing. And I know that you've done a lot of work with PBS affiliates, ABC, CBS, and the First Nations experience, which was really interesting to do some research on. So can you talk to me a little bit about how your experience writing and in the arts kind of led to this world of broadcasting?
So every time you come to the end of something, you're trying to figure out what's the next step. So I'm about to graduate from the creative writing program, and well, how am I going to make a living now? I wrote a poem dedicated to Mahalia Jackson after she died, and something told me to take the poem over to a local TV station that had a talent show. And the producer said, "So what are you going to do?" I said, "I have a poem I wrote for Mahalia Jackson." He said, "Read it to me." And then after he heard it, he called in the music director at the station. He says, "Get that quartet in here." He says, "Back him up. Let's see what happens." So I ended up being allowed to be a part of the competition, and I won. And then they bring the winners of the past 6 weeks back, and I won that as well. I said, I like TV. TV must like me. So I started going around the various TV stations and asking for interviews and just introducing myself. And I got a call back from Maryland Public Television, the head writer, Helen Jean Byrne. And she said, "Charles, we think that as a poet, you think in terms of images and words, and that's what a scriptwriter does. Would you like it if we trained you to become a scriptwriter here at Maryland Public Television?" Yeah. That started my career. And then a year later, a show that I wrote won an Emmy. Burglar Proofing, it was called. Interviewing a burglar about the choices they made, why they chose that house, and then to help listeners understand how to protect themselves. And then I wrote for a show called Black Is. Nikki Giovanni I hosted that show, and Nikki Giovanni was one of my first guests. But the ad agency where I worked previously, two of the producers there were now working in Boston. And a girlfriend of mine had a real tragic incident, and I went up to support her, to be a support for her, meaning she's a friend. And while I was there, she says, "Hey, there's this really cool TV station here in Boston. They do a lot of creative work, and it's really awesome. You should go over there and just introduce yourself." And it turned out that two of the producers that I worked with at the ad agency were working at the station. And that led to me getting an entree to getting a position there as associate producer writer. And then I got my own show, Third World.
Tell me about Third World.
Third World was interesting. At the time I was producing it, there was a news blackout because the headline was that Cuba had invaded Angola. And I was curious about it. And I learned that there was a professor of African politics at the University of Massachusetts Harbor campus, Thomas Kanza. So I went down to hear one of his lectures, and at the end of the lecture, I introduced myself, and he said, I do not have time, I'm going to meet with my publisher. I said, "Oh, okay, sir." So he rushed off, and I went down to my car, and by the time I got to my car, a blizzard had broke, just a heavy snowstorm, and he was stranded, standing at the entrance of the building. So I pulled up, I said, "I'll trade you a ride for an interview." Okay. Well, it turned out that we ended up creating a show the politics, African politics, with Professor Thomas Kanza, who I later discovered, as we became friends, that he was the ambassador to the UN for Patrice Lumumba before he was assassinated.
Wow. And so how do you think about the impact of that show and the work that you were doing with Third World?
It's really interesting. I was upset that I was placed in this public affairs department doing this kind of show when there were shows that were making really big money, getting high ratings and dramas and stuff like that. And I really wanted to be a part of that, but I couldn't seem to find my way. And then I realized that it was a gift that I was working with this show, because it was getting me much deeper involved with developing nations. It was preparing me for what was coming later. And that's another story.
Okay. And before we talk about kind of your beginnings at Wilberforce and Central State, tell me about First Nations experience and how that got started.
Well, in between there and and what happened with Third World was that I moved to Washington. I moved back to Baltimore, and I created a show called Studio 4, which won an Emmy. And that show was about, it was in my reaction to hearing elders complain, I don't know what's going on with young people these days. So I was curious, what is going on with young people these days? I started going out to public school systems and asking teachers and counselors, can you introduce me to some kids that you think maybe by the time 17, 18 years old, you knew they were on their way to prison, but they made a change in their life? Oh, Mr. Fox, we could tell you some stories. So they started introducing me, and I built a program series based on the lives of these young men and women. And one, for example, was Terrence Jones, who had been through 5 foster homes, and when the most recent foster mother took him to church, he rebelled, didn't want to go. She said, son, if you're going to live with me, this is where you got to go. And he was turned on to music in the church, and so by the time I met him, he was the top classical dancer at the Duke Ellington School for the Arts in D.C. And I asked him if I could tell his story, and he started to cry. He said, Mr. Fox, you don't know how badly I want to share my story. I want all kids to know, no matter how bad things can be, if you really want to turn your life around, you can. So later, I was contacted. I taught for a couple of years at American University, and I felt like TV was sort of like a baby. You got to constantly feed it with ideas and content. And I was like, I want to feed myself for a minute. I think I'll go back to school, maybe get my PhD. So I applied to American University, and they said, you know what, you ought to be teaching here. So I ended up teaching at American University. And as a result, I was contacted later by a woman named Iris Burnett asking if I wanted to work in the Clinton administration. So I was appointed by President Clinton, and I created the nation's first global satellite TV network promoting U.S. culture and policy. So I traveled the world. And when I came back after working in the Clinton administration, I had a real hunger. I said, my God, we're telling the world, my job was to promote to the world what the U.S. was, but we need to know what the world is. And there should be a media outlet that does that. And I worked to develop a company called World Citizen, and investors said, God, this is like PBS of the internet. So this was in 1998, and they were impressed with the concept. But just as they were bringing $25 million in for me as an investment, and just as we were about to start, they had the .com crash. I lost my money. Well, it wasn't my money yet, but The money vanished. It was, not a good investment to do this now. So I traveled to New Mexico and with my family, and I worked with the New Mexico Office of African American Affairs, and I was their communications consultant, and I developed campaigns promoting the contributions of African Americans to the statehood of New Mexico, the early fur traders and the pioneers and the Buffalo Soldiers and all that. And I became impressed with something that Dr. Bailey, who was the head of the Office of African American Affairs, was collaborating with the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. And they were going to put on a festival together, Calling All Drums. And it was storytelling in all forms from the black community and from the Native American community, and sharing those stories. And I was a speaker there, and as a result, I was asked to, as people got to know me, they asked if I would work with tribal leaders to help manage grants for their various tribal issues, like raising, for gardening, for water rights, various things to serve their community needs. And I was doing this at the Institute for American Indian Arts in New Mexico. And at the beginning of each session, I'd start out with, this is what we're going to discuss today. And as I went through the principles, the participants would break out into stories, and they would start having memories about what happened between their tribes 200 years ago over water rights and their fights and arguments they had. That dawned on me, God, there's no platform for Native American people. So I started calling around, and I contacted some headhunters, because they usually have their ears to the ground on what's going on. And he says, there's a tribe in California that's thinking about something like that. You might want to reach out to them. The San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. They were called that because during the gold rush, when the U.S. government was paying people to kill Indians to get their land and get the gold, and they would pay for scalps, men, women, and children, and every scalp you brought back, that was a certain value of money you get paid. Well, the San Manuel was basically two extended families. Imagine if you went to a family reunion and there was two families that's left of all the cousins and everyone you knew. The only way they survived was because they went under the protection of a Catholic mission nearby called San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. That's what it was. Well, later they collaborated with other indigenous tribes along the California coastline. They petitioned the federal government to be able to have casinos, and so they were quite wealthy when I met them. One that picked me up to take me to a meeting was driving a Maserati, and they gave me $6 million they committed $6 million to me to help start this channel. I did. And I gave it its name, First Nations Experience, and it was a very powerful experience.
And at this point in your career, how are you thinking about your style of leadership? Because you have this arts background, an ability to work within community, doing all of this public affairs, programming. How are you kind of thinking? Yeah, how are you thinking about yourself as a leader?
My concept as a leader, the foundation comes from my father. I'll give a quick example. When we moved to Baltimore in the 50s, it was during the black migration from the South. And I remember a man coming to the door with coveralls and the strap was broken off, asking him, could I meet with Father Fox? And my father came to the door to meet with him, and I was about 4 or 5 years old. 10 years later, that church my father established in our home. The services were on the first floor. He built the altar himself. The Sunday school classes were in the basement. Adult classes were on the summer porch, and we lived on the second and third floor in a brownstone house. 10 years later, the congregation has grown. That man in the coveralls now had his own electrical plumbing company. People were school teachers and public school administrators, and it was emerging as a really like a middle-class community. And now a church, because of white flight, there used to be a Methodist church up on the corner. The people left and abandoned the building. St. Matthew's Episcopal Church took over that building. And my father's in the middle of a sermon, and I was an altar boy with several other altar boys. And in the middle of his sermon, a woman walks in, followed by several children, 3 or 4 children, and they don't look very healthy. I mean, it's like phlegm dried on the faces and uncombed hair. And the people in the church turned around, including that man that was once with the broken strap, but now sitting in herringbone tweed jacket, looking at her like she was disgusting and looking down on her. And my father stopped in the middle of his sermon and he said, "Are you here for your own judgment, or are you here to judge others?" After the service, he overheard the women who were cleaning the communion vessels and the wine goblets and things and putting things away, talking to themselves, and he says, "That woman bothered you." "Yes, she did, coming in here like that, Father Fox." "Well, we're going to do something about it." So he organized the parishioners. He says, "You all have businesses and you all have gotten your degrees. You know how to do research. Let's research a 6 square block area and find out how many people are out there like that." And they came back with their reports. He says, "Now, those of you who have businesses, you know how to put together a business plan. And those of you who have gotten your degrees in teaching, you know how to put together a curriculum. Let's put together a program to teach these people not how to get a job, but how to keep a job." So they put together a child daycare center and things like that. A year later, the captain of the police force told them that they had eradicated welfare recipiency in that 6 square block area, and they had the lowest crime rate in the city. Long story short to say, my father's leadership was one of empathy, and it influenced me without me even knowing it. I was witnessing it. And when I went into work in Washington with WorldNet, I had 260 employees. On my first day getting to work, there were over half that number in discrimination and sexual harassment files on my desk. And it took me a few months. I was sworn in September. By that December, for Christmas, a Christmas party, the staff got together and sang a song for me because I met with every employee, met with them one-on-one, asked them their opinions about what they thought needed to be changed in the organization. This included custodians, everyone. And working with their ideas, we restructured things. I had to have some middle managers removed because they were causing the problems. They were coming in drunk and harassing people after lunch. And I changed the organization into one that was dysfunctional, into a award-winning organization. And actually, WorldNet WorldNet was a teleconferencing system for policymakers to communicate in the U.S. government, to communicate with their counterparts. For example, if you were the ambassador to Lithuania and there might have been some money laundering going on, and the Secretary of the Treasury is concerned about that, they would have a teleconference by satellite with you to discuss ways to deal with that. That was established in '85 under President Reagan. When I came aboard in '93, the world was switching away from radio and moving to TV. So I moved it from becoming a teleconferencing system to a global satellite TV network on a digital platform in 1,400 broadcast cable outlets in 10 languages. So taking that group of people that were not functioning well together to become an organized team to really do some incredible things. When I was forming FNX was created out of the KVCR public broadcasting station in San Bernardino, licensed to the San Bernardino Community College. And the board of trustees there did not think that this program would be successful, especially when I was talking about creating an event to invite all tribes. And there's 500 and more indigenous nations. And there's another one about to come on board. It's my tribe, through my cousin, the Keokahani. They will soon be recognized by the federal government. They said, oh, these board of trustees were white men, and they said, oh, that's not going to be successful. Indians, they don't get along together. They've been fighting each other for over the years, over the centuries. And I said, art transcends politics. Everyone wants their story told. And later when I put this event together, this fundraising event, I invited a well-known Indian chef to come down to prepare the food, telling that story because I integrate students in every part of it. I had student interns for the channel that I was helping to develop. I brought the chef in to work with the culinary program to show the students how to develop the food for the catering. So always integrating students into the experience. And Native leaders would coming flying in their private jets. Coming in from everywhere, and it was very successful.
And so how did you translate kind of that model of leadership and the integration of students in different parts of the community? What does that look like when you get to Wilberforce and the Mass Comm Center there?
When I came to Wilberforce, there were only 150 students enrolled on the whole campus in 2015. I built that I was asked to come aboard to build the mass communications department. Mm-hmm. We had that many students in mass communications a year later. We got grants to build a recording studio. I developed a project. I invited a psychologist from the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Early Childhood to come speak to a class. And the concern, one of the things of concern to her issue was infant mortality. Mm-hmm. So I guided the students and said, okay, you heard a problem. Let's create a solution for her and see if we can get a grant. So we wrote a grant for $10,000 to build a website. The black child, and they interviewed their peers about what it's like facing infant mortality, having a child, people, community workers, a leader, an administrator from the Kellogg Foundation, and developing their research. As a result, they were invited to speak to the National Conference on Early Childhood Development and show their project. Mm-hmm. So they wrote a grant, and I showed them how to get paid through the grant. I showed them how to problem solve and benefit from it at the same time and serving the community. That's one of the most exciting things.
And then what happened? How did you end up at WCSU specifically after that? You were
I saw that, well, I was a community advisor to the general manager, Mr. Franklin. And when I learned that he was leaving, I applied to get back into doing what I like to do with media. And that's how I arrived.
Yeah. And what did things look like when you got here as far as programming and student involvement in the station?
Well, the first thing was that we were almost ready to lose our license. The FCC public issues reports hadn't been done properly for 8 years. So I had to scramble, pull that together with the advice of a FCC attorney, and so that we wouldn't lose our license, because it was coming up that year. I started in 2020, September 2020. It was due for renewal. I started looking at supporting where we were, like ratings. We weren't looking at ratings much, and I had to really understand. I didn't realize how limited we were in terms of our reach. So we reach 8 million homes, but if there were opportunities to expand our reach, we couldn't, because we're blocked in, we're hemmed in by all the other radio signals around. So that was one thing I checked with engineering. Couldn't expand. I said, well, how do we... And then the other issue is this was a black community initially, and it's changing, because the younger generations of the families that were here historically have been moving on to better opportunities, so they didn't see the value of staying here. And so there's a gentrification that's taking place because of the cost of living to be here. It's attractive for people that don't mind a rural environment. So how do I justify? I mean, there are jazz listeners around the world, but how do I maintain that brand in this environment? And the answer came, it's a fight for democracy. That the jazz ambassadors, when Adam Clayton Powell realized that whites were coming into clubs in Harlem to hear jazz, he saw the cross-cultural relevance of it, and he pitched an idea to President Eisenhower and the State Department that jazz could be a way of promoting democracy. So Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, Dave Brubeck were sent around the world. And so I started in this current climate, I saw that jazz is a symbol of democracy. And so that's what we should remember and hold on to, and then start to explore, because you got younger audiences, but then it's our responsibility to teach and to share the value, why it's important, but at the same time find ways to engage the younger ear. So a gift from one of the alumni, Joshua Smith, $50,000 gift. We put together, it hadn't been touched. It hadn't been used. It was sitting in the foundation funds. And I contacted Mr. Smith and I said, sir, I see that you donated $50,000. What was your vision? And how can I help you execute that vision? He said, you can do whatever you want. No one called me at all about that money. Yes, sir, and I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. And we put together the Radio Lab for students to engage them in the media platform and teach podcasting and things like that.
Yeah. And do you think about kind of your role as a mentor and an educator and also a practitioner of this work any differently at an HBCU than you did at some of the PWIs that you worked at?
No. It's the same concern. The joy is the same when my first time working at American University was the night before I was going to teach, the next day start. And my mother called me. She says, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Mom, I'm scared." And she said, "Just remember one thing. Treat everyone who comes through the door as though they are the most important person that you will ever meet." And so that look in the eyes of students when you see them, when they see that you really care about them and that you're tapping into what their dream, you're tapping into what their need is in order for them to excel. I see that same light. It doesn't matter what color anybody is, that same light is there.
Yeah. And I want to ask you a little bit about this project specifically. We're here as, the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, working with Black college radio stations, public radio stations, to try to preserve their history through oral histories like this one, where we talk to general managers, people that were there at the beginnings of the stations, current students, but then we're also preserving, the physical audio materials, the programming, the reel-to-reels, the cassettes, all of that. In this moment, can you talk a little bit about why, or if you see that work as important generally as a country as we talk about our history?
Are you familiar with the Road of Slaves in Benin?
Yes, sir.
So on that road, there's a site where a ritual took place at the Tree of Forgetfulness. And it was a voodoo ritual for those who were about to be sent off into slavery. Hey, Wade. Hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah.
I'll come back.
Where are you going to be?
I'll either be here or back home.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I just have a couple more things to get through.
So
the voodoo ritual.
So
slaves.
after being examined and branded, the first stop along the Road of Slaves, that 2-kilometer walk, is the Tree of Forgetfulness, where you are told you will forget your cultural identity and history, for you are dead to the world. When I walked down that road and I stood there, everything that I had been taught about my family, everything that I had learned about the stories of my father, my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-great-grandmother, my 10th great-grandfather, it drove a nail, not a nail of death, but a nail of purpose. That I will make sure that every story I know will be told. And so it is not a nice thing to do what the HBCU radio preservation, it's not a nice thing. It's it's a necessary thing. It's an act of resistance and an act of resilience that this must happen.
Thank you. Why is WCSU important to the larger community? We talk about it being kind of internally we use the term learning lab to talk about a lot of these college stations, because people that want to be in media, students that want to be in media, can learn the technical skills here. But I'm wondering, from a broader community perspective, thinking about the history of the station and what your mission is right now, why is WCSU important to the Wilberforce community?
It is the first federally licensed HBCU radio station in the nation. I can't imagine the joy that people must have felt hearing intellectual thought and sounds of entertainment that reflected their experience. I can't imagine the joy they must have felt. That's one thing that's important, is to have your own cultural reflection. And the other thing is, I got a message from, left on our phone, from a woman. She says, "Hi, I'm just a 60-year-old white woman out here living on a farm, but I just want to tell you I love your music." And we got a postcard from a woman from Yellow Springs saying, "Thank you for saving my sanity during COVID." Got a call from people in Colorado. "Hey, what happened? You guys went off the air for a minute. What was it? We're missing you. We love your show." Somebody in Colorado? I mean, it's saying that we're doing something right, and they are connected to it. And the messages from Dr. Bert Frazier, The Upper Room, passages she reads from the Bible, books that are shared, portions of theater that are being performed by students that are being read in the larger studio on Studio C as an audio play. Introducing President Cootie and discussing his policies and his vision for the university. Sharing the achievements of the top scholars in the College of Business and land-grant and agriculture, and sharing the achievements of the students, seeing their eyes light up because they're sharing, and the fact that their achievement wasn't something that's just confined to a classroom, but it's going to impact the world. And seeing what that means to them when we're celebrating them and applauding them. That's like when you're a little baby and you're learning to walk, and everybody, yay! It's a statement and an appreciation that you're alive, and we're proud of you, and you're going to be a contributor to society and to the world. And we're glad to be a part of that. Just to share that storytelling is, that's what it means.
And what do you want the legacy of your leadership here to be?
Well, we're working to complete a digital media studio. The world is changing, and obviously we're in a culture war. And I want to leave something. My goal is to leave a facility where students have access, hands-on experiential learning, to say, I'm here.
Thank you. In the interest of time, those are the questions that I wanted to ask you, but before I stop recording, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you think is important to share, either about you personally or about the station?
You asked me earlier, what was it like moving around as a child? This is the first place I've been in a long time in my life where people have been in one place almost all their lives, or people have come here to go to school and are still here 20 years later. And they're committed to this university. It's like a lifeblood to them. I'm a nomad, and I've moved around a lot, and home is wherever I sit down. You know, I'm very comfortable. But I've realized the value and to appreciate what Central State University means to people in the community who have been here all their lives. And yesterday, a student came through who hadn't graduated 10 years ago, and he talked about the joy of having met oh my God, his name just slipped right past me, previous general manager, Ed Clay. And he talked about him with such joy and excitement. And he had moved on in his life, but he was back here for an interview, and he was recapturing the joy of what it was. He says, I wasn't even a communications major, but I was invited in the radio station, and they heard me, and they mentored me. And he says, and I still feel that energy here. And so there's something here, whether it's in the home of the Buffalo Soldier, or the underground tunnels, or the traditions left by Mr. Galt in Yellow Springs, who paid for his own freedom from Kentucky and moved to Ohio, or that gravesite out at the Tarbox Cemetery of Martin Delaney, who was the highest ranking black officer in the Union Army in the Civil War. The Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center. There's a lot here in the soil. Don't take it for granted.